Jessica. Jessica. You weren't supposed to be here yet. I couldn't stop you from walking in. I could only make sure you didn't walk out alone.
If any of what you told me tonight is a lie, I will make you regret ever standing up in that ballroom.
Ballroom. Good. You'll need that fire for what's coming. Because I have already buried one woman I failed to protect in time. I am not doing that again. Not with you.
Jessica Whitfield saw her husband's hand curl beneath another woman's chin, and the champagne glass she'd been holding for 11 minutes shattered against the ballroom floor before she even registered letting go of it. The sound was swallowed by the orchestra, by 300 voices rising in applause, by the roaring in her own ears, but nothing could swallow what her eyes had just confirmed. Nathaniel. Her Nathaniel. The man she'd promised her life to, in a small Harlem church, 11 years ago, standing beneath a canopy of white orchids, lowering his mouth to a Korean woman's ear, as though the last decade of his life belonged to someone else entirely. She'd flown home 4 days early to surprise him for their anniversary. Instead, she was standing at the back of a wedding, his wedding, watching the room turn to face the newlyweds and erupt in celebration. Nathaniel's eyes found hers across the marble floor. He didn't flinch. He didn't pale. He looked, God help her, inconvenienced. Jessica, he said, loud enough for the silence spreading around them to carry it. You weren't supposed to be here yet. Before she could answer, a stranger rose from a front row table, tall, dark-suited, a scar tracing his jaw, and the entire wedding party parted for him like he was something the room had been waiting on. If you're watching this and want to remember where you were the day this story grabbed you, drop your city in the comments below, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because you are not ready for where this one goes. Before we begin, if you can't get enough of Afro-Korean Mafia Boss romances, you'll love my Ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. It includes 15 complete stories, 20 audiobooks, and 5 exclusive bonus stories you won't find on YouTube. Simply click the link in the description, or if you're watching on a TV, pause the video and open your phone's camera and point it at the QR code on your screen. It takes just seconds. Now, let's enjoy today's unforgettable story. The next several minutes blurred for Jessica in a way she would never fully recover the details of. She remembered Do-hyun's hand, warm and certain at the small of her back. Not possessive, not presumptuous, but steady, the way you'd guide someone who might collapse. She remembered a side door, cool night air, a black car waiting at the curb as though it had been summoned before the scene had even finished playing out, which, she would later understand, it had. You knew, she said, once they were seated inside, the ballroom's golden light retreating behind tinted glass. You knew this was happening tonight. I did. And you let it happen? You watched me walk in there? I couldn't stop you from walking in, Do-hyun said. I could only make sure you didn't walk out alone. Jessica pressed her palms against her eyes, willing herself not to cry in front of a stranger, though the effort was already failing. 11 years, she said, more to herself than to him. 11 years. And he, who is she? Why would he do this to me in front of everyone? Why not just leave? Why not just, her voice broke. Why humiliate me like that? Do-hyun was quiet for a long moment, watching the city slide past the window, glass towers lit gold and blue against a black sky. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier command. It was lower now, careful, the voice of a man deciding how much truth someone could survive receiving all at once. Her name is Yoon So-yeon, he said. Her father is Yoon Tae-min. Do you know who that is? Why would I know who that is? He owns 4 shipping companies, 2 of which move things across borders that customs officials are paid very well not to look inside. Do-hyun glanced at her. Your husband works in international logistics consulting, or so his business card says. Jessica felt something cold move through her chest. Nathaniel doesn't. He's not involved in anything like that. He handles contracts, supply chain optimization. He's boring. He's careful. She stopped, hearing herself. Hearing how much of that sentence was built on 11 years of trust she now had every reason to doubt. 3 years ago, Do-hyun said, your husband began working directly with Taemin, not consulting, laundering, moving money through shell companies registered in your name, Mrs. Whitfield, without your knowledge, because a wife's name draws less suspicion than a husband's when investigators start asking who owns what. The car had stopped moving. Jessica hadn't noticed. She stared at him. My name. There are at least 6 accounts and 2 properties currently in your legal name that you have never seen, never signed for in person, and never benefited from a single dollar of, Do-hyun said. Your signature has been forged so many times over the past 3 years that a forensic document examiner could probably map your husband's learning curve. That's not possible. I would know. I would have seen bank statements, taxes, something. Would you? Or did your husband handle the finances because he told you it was easier that way? Because you trusted him? Because 11 years of marriage doesn't usually come with the instinct to audit the man you love? Jessica said nothing, because there was nothing to say. It was exactly what had happened. Nathaniel had taken over their finances in year 4, gently, reasonably. You're always so busy with the gallery, baby. Let me handle the boring stuff. And she had let him, because that was what partnership was supposed to look like. So tonight, she said slowly, testing the shape of it, wasn't a wedding out of love. Tonight was a merger, Do-hyun said. Marrying into Taemin's family gives your husband legal cover, deeper access, and a Korean identity that makes it significantly harder for authorities, or for me, to trace the money back to him. Yoon So-yeon isn't a woman he fell in love with. She's a signature on a contract he needed. And me? Jessica's voice cracked on the word. What was I? 11 years, Do-hyun. What was I to him? The perfect front, he said. And though his voice was gentle, the words themselves were merciless. A respectable American wife. A gallery owner with a clean name and no criminal record. You made him look legitimate for exactly as long as he needed you to. Jessica turned her face to the window so he wouldn't see her cry, though she suspected he already knew, and that he was giving her the privacy of pretending otherwise. The city outside kept glittering, indifferent, beautiful, the way cities always are when your entire life is quietly burning down inside a stopped car. Why do you care? She finally asked. Why does any of this matter to a man like you? You said it yourself back there. I don't know you. So why did you stand up in front of 300 people and put a target on your own back for a stranger? Do-hyun was quiet long enough that Jessica turned to look at him, and for the first time since she'd seen him cross that ballroom floor like a verdict being delivered, something in his expression looked almost uncertain. Because 6 months ago, he said, your husband came to me, not to Taemin, to me. He wanted my organization's protection for a shipment. I turned him down. But in the process of investigating why a supposedly clean American consultant needed cartel-level protection for a supply chain contract, I found you. Found me how? Photographs, public records, a profile your husband didn't know I'd built. Because I build profiles on everyone who comes asking me for favors, Mrs. Whitfield. I know what car you drive. I know you own a small gallery in Harlem that's barely breaking even because you'd rather show unknown artists than sell what's fashionable. I know you send money to your mother in Atlanta every month without telling your husband, because some part of you already didn't trust him with the whole truth of where your money went. He paused. I have spent 6 months watching a man build an empire on the back of a woman who has no idea she's the foundation. And somewhere in those 6 months, I stopped watching as a matter of business. Jessica's breath caught. You're saying I'm saying I made a decision tonight that I have been building toward for a long time, Do-hyun said. You didn't ask for my protection. I understand that. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust a single word I've said. And by tomorrow morning, half of Seoul is going to be calling you the American woman that Kang Do-hyun claimed in the middle of Yoon Tae-min's daughter's wedding. That is a dangerous thing to be. I am not going to pretend otherwise. Then why do it? Because the alternative, he said quietly, was letting you walk back into that hotel room alone tonight, broken-hearted and humiliated, with no idea that the men your husband works for consider loose ends a liability, and that a wife who's just been publicly and permanently discarded is, unfortunately, exactly the kind of loose-end men like Tae-min prefer, tied off quickly and quietly. The color drained from Jessica's face. You think they'd hurt me? I think your husband just made you the only witness to a criminal alliance in front of 300 people, Do-hyun said. And I think that by morning, someone in that room is going to suggest to Tae-min that an angry, humiliated ex-wife with a paper trail leading straight into his shipping empire is not a woman he wants free to talk to reporters, lawyers, or the FBI's Seoul field office. Which is precisely why you are not spending tonight anywhere your husband or his new father-in-law knows how to find you. If this story has already gripped you the way it's gripped me telling it, take a second to comment your thoughts below. I want to know if you saw this twist coming, or if it hit you the way it hit Jessica. And if you love stories with this much tension, hit that like button, because it truly helps this story reach more people who need it. The car pulled up outside a residence Jessica didn't recognize. Not a hotel, but a private compound tucked behind high walls and old pine trees, lit softly against the dark. The kind of place that didn't announce its own wealth because it had never needed to. Do-hyun didn't get out immediately. He turned to her instead, studying her with an intensity she felt in her sternum. I'm not asking you to trust me tonight, he said. I'm asking you to survive tonight. Tomorrow, you can hate me if you want to. You can walk out that gate and go straight to the American embassy and tell them everything I just told you, and I will not stop you. But tonight, you sleep somewhere safe, and in the morning, we start finding out exactly how deep Nathaniel buried you in his mess, so that when you leave him, and you will leave him, you leave with proof, not just heartbreak. Jessica looked at the compound, then at the man beside her, this stranger who had upended her entire understanding of her marriage in the space of a single car ride, who spoke about her husband's crimes with the calm precision of a man reading a grocery list, and who had, for reasons she still didn't fully trust, chosen to stand between her and a room full of people who would have let her walk out humiliated and unprotected. If any of what you told me tonight is a lie, she said quietly, I will make you regret ever standing up in that ballroom. Something flickered across Do-hyun's face. Not offense, but the faint, almost startled beginning of respect. Good, he said. You'll need that fire for what's coming. Because Nathaniel isn't finished tonight. Tonight was only the beginning of what he's willing to do to make sure you never find out how much of his empire was built on your name. He opened the car door and the cool night air rushed in, carrying with it the distant, fading sound of an orchestra still playing for a wedding that Jessica now understood had never truly been about love at all. And somewhere behind them, in a ballroom glittering with orchids and lies, Nathaniel Whitfield was already making a phone call he did not want his new bride's father to overhear. A call that would set into motion the very danger Do-hyun had just pulled Jessica out of the path of. With only hours to spare, Nathaniel's hands were shaking when he finally got Taemin alone on the terrace. Away from the reception's lingering murmur, away from Seo-yeon's watchful bridesmaids who kept glancing at him like he was something that had tracked mud across their perfect night. "You told me she'd be in Seoul until Sunday," Nathaniel said, low and urgent. "You told me your people confirmed her itinerary." Taemin didn't turn around immediately. He stood at the railing, looking out over the city lights, a cigar burning slow between two fingers, a man who had clearly weathered far worse surprises than an ex-wife walking into a wedding uninvited. "My people confirmed the itinerary I was given," he said finally. "Perhaps you should ask your assistant why the return flight changed 4 days ago and no one thought to mention it to you. That's not the problem right now." Nathaniel dragged a hand down his face. "The problem is, Kang Do-hyun just stood up in front of everyone and put his name on her. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what he's going to do with what he knows?" Now Taemin turned, and whatever patience he'd been extending Nathaniel for the past 6 months visibly thinned. "What he knows, Mr. Whitfield, is a question you should have asked yourself before you married a woman and then spent 3 years building a laundering pipeline underneath her name, without securing her silence, her ignorance, or her loyalty. You assured me she was compliant, unaware, a convenient front who would never cause complications. She was unaware. She still is. She stood in that ballroom and watched her husband marry another woman," Taemin said flatly. "She is no longer unaware of anything. And now Kang Do-hyun has his hands on her, which means within a week, possibly less, she will know precisely how many accounts carry her signature, precisely how many properties are registered in her name, and precisely how much exposure that creates for both of us if she decides to talk." Nathaniel felt the floor of his careful, controlled life tilting beneath him. Do-hyun doesn't know everything. He can't. There's no way he's had time to trace. Kang Do-hyun, Taemin interrupted, has been quietly buying up debt on 3 of my shipping subsidiaries for the past 4 months. I only discovered this myself 2 weeks ago. He does not do anything without already understanding exactly what he's walking into, which means the only real question left is why a man like him would risk exposing himself publicly in my daughter's wedding over an American woman he had never even spoken to before tonight. Taemin studied Nathaniel with something colder than anger, calculation, unless he already had a reason to want her close. Which makes me wonder, Mr. Whitfield, how long Kang Do-hyun has actually been watching your operation, and whether you were ever truly hidden from him at all. Nathaniel said nothing, because he had no answer that wouldn't terrify him further. "Fix this," Taemin said, turning back to the railing, quietly. "I don't care how. But if that woman surfaces with documentation, if she goes to the authorities, if she so much as whispers your name and mine in the same sentence to the wrong person, I will not be cleaning up your mess for you a second time. I will simply remove the mess. Do you understand me?" The cigar smoke curled up into the dark, and Nathaniel understood perfectly, in a way that turned his stomach. Jessica woke the next morning in an unfamiliar bed, in a room with pale wood floors and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden she didn't recognize, and for 3 full seconds she forgot everything. Forgot the ballroom, forgot the orchids, Forgot Nathaniel's face when he'd said you weren't supposed to be here yet. Before the memory crashed back into her all at once, and she had to press both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. There was a knock, soft, at the door. A woman entered, Korean, maybe 60, with kind, unreadable eyes, and a tray of tea she set on the low table without a word, before nodding once and leaving again. Jessica sat frozen on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the steam rising off the cup, feeling like a woman who had fallen asleep in one life and woken up in someone else's. She found Do-hyun an hour later on a covered terrace at the back of the house, a laptop open in front of him, two other men in dark suits standing a respectful distance away, murmuring to each other in Korean before falling silent as she approached. Do-hyun closed the laptop. "You slept," he said. It wasn't quite a question. Barely. Jessica sat across from him, arms crossed against a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "I keep waiting to wake up from this. I wish I could tell you that you will." He slid a folder across the table toward her. "I had my people pull everything overnight. I want to warn you. It's worse than what I told you in the car." Jessica opened the folder with hands that didn't feel entirely like her own. Bank statements, property deeds, wire transfer records, dozens of them, spanning back nearly 3 years, every single one bearing a signature that was unmistakably meant to be hers, looping, confident, the small flourish under the W that she'd developed in college and never changed. She had signed thousands of documents in her life. She knew her own signature the way she knew her own face, and she had never signed a single page in front of her. 6 accounts, she read aloud, her voice hollow. 2 properties. A shell corporation registered in Delaware called, she stopped, Whitfield Cultural Holdings. That sounds like it could be my gallery. Like it's connected to my actual business. It's designed to, Do-hyun said. If anyone ever investigated, the paper trail leads to a legitimate American art business owned by a legitimate American woman. You become the explanation for money that has no other legal explanation. That's the entire function you serve in this structure, Jessica. Not partner, not wife, camouflage. She flipped another page and went still. A property in Queens, a brownstone she had never seen, never heard of, purchased 18 months ago for $1.4 million, closing documents bearing her forged signature beside Nathaniel's real one. He bought a house, she said, with money I apparently laundered without knowing it, and put my name on the deed. And I have been living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Bed-Stuy for 18 months, arguing with him about whether we could afford to renovate the kitchen. There's more, Do-hyun said, and something in his voice made her look up. I had a forensic accountant go through the transaction dates last night. Jessica, the account activity accelerates every time you traveled, every business trip, every gallery opening out of state. Every visit to your mother in Atlanta. The timing isn't a coincidence. He was using your absences deliberately. Which means he wasn't just hiding this from you. He was actively managing your schedule to create windows he could operate in. The betrayal of it landed in stages. First as disbelief, then as a slow, sick understanding of 100 small moments she'd never once questioned. Nathaniel encouraging her to take that gallery consulting trip to Chicago last spring. Nathaniel suggesting she visit her mother for 2 weeks last Christmas so he could get ahead on some contracts. Nathaniel, gently, lovingly, architecting 3 years of her own life around a crime she hadn't known existed. I trusted him with everything, she whispered. My name, my money. My life. And this whole time he was just building something on top of me like I was foundation. like I was concrete. You were never nothing to him, Do-hyun said. And for the first time his voice lost some of its careful control. That's the part I don't think you understand yet, and I hesitate to say it, because it changes nothing about what he did to you. But a man doesn't choose a stranger to build a 3-year criminal architecture around. He chose you because he trusted you completely. Trusted that you'd never look too closely, never ask the wrong question, never doubt him. That kind of trust isn't built out of nothing, Jessica. It's built out of 11 years of a woman being exactly as good and exactly as loyal as you clearly were. He didn't betray a fool. He betrayed someone who loved him enough not to suspect him. That's not a flaw in you. That's what he exploited. Jessica's eyes burned, and this time she didn't try to hide it. That doesn't make it hurt less. No, Do-hyun agreed quietly. It doesn't. I'm not offering you comfort. I'm offering you the truth, because I think you've had enough people offer you comfortable lies to last a lifetime. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, steadying herself, and when she looked up at him again, something had shifted, the shock beginning, slowly, to harden into something more useful. What happens now? If he's laundering money for a shipping empire, if I'm implicated by forgery I didn't even know about, what do I do? Go to the police? The FBI? Will they even believe an American woman claiming her husband forged her signature across 6 accounts? They'll believe forensic handwriting analysis, Do-hyun said. They'll believe metadata on digital documents that prove you weren't in the country, weren't near a notary, weren't anywhere close to where these signatures were supposedly made. I already have someone building that case, but I need you to understand something before you decide to go that route, and I need you to hear it clearly. Then say it. The moment you go to federal authorities, Do-hyun said, Tae-min will know within hours. Men like him have people inside every relevant office in Seoul, and likely several in the United States as well. And a man like Tae-min does not wait to find out whether you're going to cooperate with prosecutors. He acts to make sure you never get the chance. The words settled over the terrace like a blade laid gently on a table. You're saying he'd kill me. I'm saying he has killed people for less exposure than what you're now carrying in your head, Do-hyun said, without flinching from it, without softening it. And somehow that honesty was more reassuring than any comfort could have been. Which is why, before you do anything else, before you call a lawyer or a journalist or the FBI, you need protection that Tae-min knows better than to test. And right now, the only protection powerful enough to hold that line is mine. Jessica studied him for a long moment. This man who had upended her life in a single night, who spoke of murder and money laundering with the same steady calm he might use to discuss the weather, who had, for reasons still unclear to her, decided her survival was worth the risk of war with one of Seoul's most dangerous families. Why, she said again, quieter this time, are you really doing this? Do-hyun was silent long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he reached into his jacket and set something on the table between them. A photograph, worn at the corners, clearly carried for a long time. A woman, Korean, beautiful, laughing at something outside the frame. A little boy on her hip. My sister, he said, Min Jung. She married an American businessman when she was 26. Charming, successful. He moved her to Los Angeles, told her family she was happy, told everyone she'd simply grown distant, busy with her new American life. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't happy. She was trapped in a marriage to a man who used her citizenship and her silence to move money for people far more dangerous than your husband. And when she finally understood what she'd become part of, when she tried to leave, they didn't let her walk away quietly. Jessica's breath caught. What happened to her? She died in what was ruled a car accident 4 years ago, Do-hyun said, his voice perfectly level, which somehow made it worse. I have never believed that ruling for a single day since. I was 2 weeks too late finding out what was actually happening to her. 2 weeks, Jessica. That's the difference between the sister I have now, which is a photograph, and the sister I should have had for the rest of my life. He looked at her, and something raw moved behind his composure for just a moment before he closed it away again. So when I found out what your husband had built on top of you, when I understood exactly what kind of trap you were standing inside without knowing it, I made a decision that I would not be 2 weeks late again. The silence between them held something enormous. Jessica looked at the photograph, at the laughing woman who would never know that her death had reshaped a stranger's fate on the other side of the world. And she understood, with sudden and total clarity, exactly what kind of man was sitting across from her. Not a savior swooping in for glory, not a predator circling a vulnerable woman, but a man carrying a grief so specific it had built itself into a mission. I'm sorry, she said softly. About your sister. Don't be sorry, Do-hyun said. Be careful, because the version of this story where you survive it depends entirely on how quickly we move and how completely you trust me over the next several days. Even when trusting me feels impossible, even when everything in you wants to run home and pretend none of this happened. I can't go home, Jessica said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that broke something loose in her chest. There is no home. There's an apartment I don't actually own with a man I don't actually know, and a house in Queens I've never seen, and a name that isn't mine anymore because he made it a weapon. Her voice cracked, finally, completely. 11 years of certainty collapsing all at once. 11 years, Do-hyun. I gave him 11 years, and he spent the last 3 of them robbing you blind, while calling it love, Do-hyun said. Not unkindly, but without softening the truth either. I know this is the most painful morning of your life. I know nothing I say will make that easier, but I promise you this. By the time this is finished, Nathaniel Whitfield is going to understand exactly what it costs to build an empire on a woman he thought would never look too closely. Before we continue, a quick note for everyone who loves these Mafia Boss romance stories. I've bundled 20 of our most loved Afro-Korean romance stories into the ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. You'll get all 15 complete stories, 20 audiobook versions, plus 5 exclusive bonus stories you won't find on YouTube. If you'd love to enjoy these stories anytime without ads or interruptions, just click the link below or scan the QR code by pausing the video, opening your phone's camera, and pointing it at your TV or screen. Your next favorite romance could be waiting for you before this story even ends. Jessica wiped her eyes one last time and sat up straighter, something steadier settling into her spine. Okay, she said. Tell me what you need me to do. For now, nothing, Do-hyun said. For now, you rest, you eat, and you let my people finish building the case that will protect you when this becomes public. But Jessica, I need you to understand something before we go any further, because I won't lie to you the way he did. He held her gaze, steady, unflinching. Once we move on this, once we expose what Nathaniel and Taemin have built, there is no quiet ending. No discreet divorce, no polite settlement, no walking away with your dignity intact and your name cleared behind closed doors. Men like Taemin don't lose contained losses. They lose publicly, or they don't lose at all. Which means when we do this, we do it completely, or we don't do it at all. Jessica thought of the ballroom, Of Nathaniel's face when he'd called her presence an inconvenience. Of 11 years reduced to camouflage for a criminal enterprise she hadn't even known she was funding. She thought of the brownstone in Queens she'd never seen, purchased with money that had passed through her stolen name, and the quiet, patient way Nathaniel had rearranged her entire life to build his lie around her. "Then we do it completely," she said. "I want everything. I want it public. I want him to stand in front of a room and lose everything the way I lost it last night, in front of everyone who ever respected him." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved across Do-hyun's face. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. The look of a man realizing the woman across from him was not going to be as fragile as her circumstances suggested. "Good," he said, "because Nathaniel isn't the only one you should be worried about. Taemin gave your husband an order last night on that terrace, and my people confirmed it an hour ago through a source inside his security detail." Do-hyun's expression hardened, all traces of softness gone. "He told Nathaniel to fix the problem you represent. Quietly, if possible, permanently, if necessary. Which means the man you were married to for 11 years is currently deciding how far he's willing to go to make sure you never testify against him, and we have significantly less time than either of us would like to make sure he never gets that chance." Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of a hotel suite he wasn't supposed to be using, not the honeymoon suite, not anywhere So-yeon might look for him. With his laptop open to an account he'd told himself he would never touch again, watching numbers move that made his stomach twist with something close to panic. The knock came at 11:40, 3 sharp raps, and Nathaniel knew before he opened the door who it would be. Jin-ho worked for Taemin directly, handled the parts of the business that never appeared on any invoice, and the sight of him standing in the hallway with his hands folded in front of him, patient as a man waiting for a bus, told Nathaniel everything he needed to know about how the conversation was going to go. "Mr. Yoon wants an update," Jin-ho said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "Tell him it's handled." Nathaniel closed the laptop. Too quickly, too obviously. "I'm working on it. He said you would say that." Jin-ho walked to the window, looked out at the city, unbothered, the way men are unbothered when they know exactly how much power they're carrying into a room. "He also said to remind you that you came to him 3 years ago asking for help, Mr. Whitfield. Not the reverse. You needed a way to move money that American banks would flag in a heartbeat. Mr. Yoon gave you infrastructure, protection, and eventually a path to permanent legitimacy through his daughter. In exchange, he asked for one thing: discretion. And in the span of a single evening, you have made discretion impossible." "Kang Do-hyun made it impossible," Nathaniel snapped. "I didn't invite him into that ballroom." "No," Jin-ho agreed. "But you invited your wife into a country where a man like Kang Do-hyun has eyes on everyone. And now he has eyes on her." He turned from the window. "Mr. Yoon has generously decided this is still recoverable. But the window is closing quickly, and he would like you to understand that his patience is not." Nathaniel felt sweat gather at his collar, despite the room's cool air. "What does he want me to do?" "Bring her back into a controlled environment," Jin-ho said simply. "Convince her to meet you. Somewhere private. Somewhere Kang Do-hyun's people are not watching. After that, Mr. Yoon's own people will handle the rest." The words landed with a weight that made Nathaniel's vision swim. "You're talking about Jin-ho. She's my wife. She was my wife for 11 years. She is a liability, with a paper trail leading directly into a shipping empire that moves more than shipping containers," Jin-ho said, without a trace of cruelty, which somehow made it worse. You built that liability yourself, Mr. Whitfield, one forged signature at a time. Mr. Yoon is simply asking you to finish what you started. Unless, of course, you would prefer he finish it without your input. In which case, I imagine the story he tells afterward would place considerably more blame on your shoulders than the truth deserves. Nathaniel stood very still, understanding for the first time the true shape of the trap he had built for himself. There was no version of the next week where he emerged with his freedom, his fortune, and his conscience all intact. There was only a choice between which parts of himself he was willing to sacrifice to keep the other two. I need a few days, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You have two, Jin-ho said, and let himself out. Jessica spent the next 2 days learning things about her own life that made her feel like a stranger walking through someone else's house. Do-hyun's team, a quiet, efficient group of forensic accountants, a former prosecutor named Grace Lin, who now ran a boutique firm specializing in financial crimes, and a digital forensics expert who barely spoke but produced results faster than anyone Jessica had ever worked with, built a case with a thoroughness that left her simultaneously grateful and nauseated. Every forged signature, every backdated document, every wire transfer disguised as a gallery transaction that had never actually occurred. It was, Grace told her on the second afternoon, one of the cleanest paper trails of financial coercion she'd seen in 15 years of practice. Clean enough to potentially clear Jessica of any criminal liability entirely, provided they moved carefully and moved first. The problem, Grace said, spreading documents across the terrace table where Jessica had practically taken up residence, isn't proving what happened to you. It's timing the exposure so that Taemin's people don't have a chance to destroy evidence, silence witnesses, or worse, before we can get this in front of federal prosecutors on both sides of the Pacific. How long does that take? Jessica asked. Normally? Months. Grace glanced at Do-hyun, who stood at the terrace railing, arms crossed, watching the garden below with the stillness of a man perpetually listening for something. Given what we now know about Taemin's timeline, I'd guess we have days, not months. Jessica had learned, over 2 days of near-constant proximity, to read the small shifts in Do-hyun's composure. The almost invisible tightening at his jaw when a report came in that troubled him, the particular stillness that meant he was calculating something he didn't want to say aloud yet. She saw it now. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, once Grace had excused herself to make a call. Do-hyun didn't turn from the railing immediately. "My source inside Taemin's security detail went dark 6 hours ago." "What does that mean?" "It could mean nothing. People go quiet for 100 reasons that have nothing to do with danger." He finally turned to face her, and the careful blankness in his expression told her he didn't believe that explanation any more than she did. Or it could mean Taemin's people found him. Which would mean they now know exactly how much I know, and exactly how I've been finding it out. Jessica felt cold move through her, despite the warm afternoon. "And if that's true, then they'll assume I know everything they've discussed regarding you," Do-hyun said, "including whatever instructions Taemin gave your husband on that terrace 2 nights ago. You said he told Nathaniel to fix the problem I represent," Jessica said slowly, forcing herself to say the words she'd been avoiding since he'd first spoken them. "You meant kill me. That's what you meant. And you softened it because you didn't want to say it plainly." "I meant exactly what I said," Do-hyun replied, holding her gaze without flinching. "And I won't soften it now, because you deserve to understand precisely what you're facing. Yes. If Nathaniel fails to bring you back into a position where Taemin's people can control the situation, Taemin will authorize whatever measures he believes necessary to protect his empire. That includes your death, made to look accidental, the way it likely looked for my sister. The bluntness of it should have terrified her more than it did. Instead, something in Jessica went very quiet and very clear, the way water goes still right before it freezes. Then Nathaniel has to reach out to me, doesn't he? If that's the plan Taemin gave him, Nathaniel has to find some way to get me alone. Yes. Then let him. Do-hyun's expression sharpened. Jessica, you said it yourself. Days, not months. If we wait for your team to build an airtight case while Taemin's people are already moving, we lose the only advantage we have, which is that they don't yet know how much you've told me, and they don't yet know I'd never walk into a room with Nathaniel without protection. She stood, her heartbeat loud in her own ears, but her voice steady in a way that surprised her. Let him reach out, let him think it's working. And when he brings me somewhere private, your people are already there waiting. And Grace has everything she needs to make sure that when Taemin's men are arrested for conspiracy to commit murder, on top of everything else, there's no version of this where anyone walks away calling it a misunderstanding. For a long moment, Do-hyun simply looked at her, and something shifted in his face. Not the careful protectiveness she'd grown used to over the past 2 days, but something closer to genuine surprise, and beneath that, unmistakably, respect. That's an extraordinarily dangerous plan, he said. I've had an extraordinarily dangerous week, Jessica said. I'd rather walk into danger with my eyes open than keep waiting for it to find me while I hide in a garden drinking tea. Do-hyun studied her for another long moment before something in his shoulders eased, just slightly. The look of a man recalculating his understanding of exactly who he was protecting. Then we do it exactly right, he said. Because I will not lose you the way I lost her. Not to a plan that leaves a single variable to chance. The call came the following evening, exactly as Do-hyun had predicted. Jessica's phone lit up with a name she hadn't seen on her screen in 4 days, and her hand trembled slightly as she answered it. Do-hyun watching from across the room. Grace Lin already recording. A second phone tracing the call's origin in real time. Jessica. Nathaniel's voice sounded different than it had in the ballroom. Smaller, frightened, almost pleading. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. Funny, Jessica said, forcing her voice into something cold and flat, something that gave away nothing of the calculation happening behind it. I got married in front of you 2 days ago. That's not... Jessica, please, just listen to me. I can explain everything, but not on the phone. It's not safe. I need to see you, in person, just the two of us. Why would I ever want to be alone with you again? Because you're in danger, Nathaniel said, and something in the way he said it made her stomach turn. Not because it was a lie, but because it wasn't. More danger than you understand. There are people who think you know things that could hurt them, and I'm the only one who can protect you from what they're planning to do. You're the one they sent to do it, Jessica thought, but she kept her voice soft, uncertain, exactly the tone of a frightened, heartbroken wife reaching for the only familiar thing left in a world that had gone sideways. Nathaniel, I don't know what to believe anymore. You married someone else. You lied to me for years. How am I supposed to trust that this isn't just another lie? Because I still love you, Nathaniel said, and his voice cracked in a way that Jessica, despite everything, felt land somewhere old and tender inside her chest before she crushed it flat. Everything else was... It got complicated. It got out of control. But what I feel for you was never fake. I need you to believe that. Please. Meet me tomorrow night. There's a restaurant on Namsan. Private, quiet. I'll explain everything, and I'll help you get somewhere safe. I owe you that much. Jessica looked across the room at Do-hyun, who gave the smallest nod. Okay, she said softly into the phone. Tomorrow night. But Nathaniel, if this is another trap, I will never forgive you. It's not, Nathaniel said, and Jessica couldn't tell, even after 11 years of knowing his voice better than almost anyone alive, whether he believed that himself. I promise you, Jessica, tomorrow night, everything gets explained. The call ended, and the room fell silent, except for the soft click of Grace Lynn closing her laptop. We have the location, Grace said. We have the timeline. Do-hyun, if your people can secure the restaurant and the surrounding block without tipping off Tae-min's surveillance. They can, Do-hyun said, though his eyes stayed on Jessica, dark with something that looked almost like fear on her behalf. Jessica, once we go forward with this, there's no pulling back. If anything goes wrong tomorrow night, if Tae-min's men suspect for even a moment that this is a trap, rather than a trap closing around you. I know, Jessica said quietly. You don't have to say it again. I need to say it, Do-hyun said. And for the first time in 4 days, something in his composure cracked entirely, raw and unguarded. Because I have already buried one woman I failed to protect in time. I am not doing that again. Not with you. The words hung in the room, heavier than either of them seemed prepared for, and Jessica felt something shift between them that had nothing to do with money laundering or federal cases or dangerous men in dark suits. Something that had been quietly building in the spaces between his careful protection and her slow, painful unraveling. Something neither of them had named yet, but that both of them, in that silent, charged moment, clearly felt. Then make sure your people don't fail, Jessica said softly. Because I intend to walk out of that restaurant tomorrow night with everything I need to bury Nathaniel and Tae-min both. And I'd like to be alive to watch it happen. Do-hyun held her gaze a moment longer than necessary before nodding once, sharp and final, already turning to issue instructions to the men waiting near the door. Men who would spend the next 24 hours quietly securing a restaurant on Namsan Mountain, laying the groundwork for a confrontation that would either end with Nathaniel and Tae-min's entire operation collapsing in handcuffs, or with Jessica Whitfield walking into a trap so carefully disguised as reconciliation that not even 11 years of marriage had prepared her to see it coming until it was far, far too late. The restaurant on Namsan sat perched above the city like something suspended between worlds. Private rooms wrapped in dark wood and paper screens, the kind of place where powerful men conducted business they didn't want overheard, which was precisely why Tae-min had approved it without a second thought. Jessica arrived at 8, exactly on time, wearing a wire so thin Grace Lynn had promised her it would survive even a pat-down, though she prayed it would never come to that. Do-hyun's people were already in place, 2 posing as kitchen staff, 1 as a driver in the parking structure below, another 2 blocks away in an unmarked car with Grace and a recording rig sensitive enough to catch a confession through solid oak. Do-hyun himself sat in that car, jaw tight, watching a live feed from a camera hidden in Jessica's earring. Every muscle in his body straining against the decision to stay behind, rather than walk in beside her. I don't like this, he'd said one final time in the car, 20 minutes earlier. I know, Jessica had answered, but he won't talk if he sees you. He'll talk to me. That's the whole plan. Now she walked through a paper screen door into a private room where Nathaniel sat alone at a low table, a single lamp casting long shadows across his face, and for one disorienting moment, she saw not the man who had humiliated her in a ballroom, Not the architect of a 3-year betrayal, but simply Nathaniel, her Nathaniel, tired and hollow-eyed in a way she hadn't seen since his father's funeral 8 years ago. "You came," he said, and something in his voice sounded almost surprised, almost grateful, in a way that didn't match the man Do-hyun had described. "You asked me to." Jessica sat across from him, keeping her hands folded, keeping her voice carefully uncertain. "Explain it to me, Nathaniel. All of it. Why you did this." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the lamp between them. 3 years ago, the consulting firm was failing. I'd taken out loans against our savings you didn't know about. I was drowning, and Taemin offered me a way out. I told myself it was temporary. One contract, one favor, and then I'd walk away clean. He laughed, bitter and small. Nobody walks away clean from men like that. Every year, the ask got bigger. And somewhere in there, I stopped seeing a way out that didn't involve losing everything. My freedom, my name, maybe my life. "So you built your escape route out of me," Jessica said. "Out of my name, my signature, my trust." "I told myself I was protecting you," Nathaniel said, and his voice cracked in a way that, despite everything, she still felt in the old, tender part of her chest that 11 years hadn't fully burned away. "That if it was all in your name, if anything ever went wrong, you could plead ignorance and walk away untouched, while I took the fall. I convinced myself that was love, Jessica. That was the lie I told myself every single night for 3 years. And marrying So-yeon?" Nathaniel's hands tightened around his glass. "Taemin said it would end the arrangement, that once I was family, I'd be protected, and you'd be free of all of it. No questions, no exposure, just a quiet divorce, and a settlement large enough to disappear on." He looked up at her, and for the first time, real anguish moved across his face. "I didn't know he meant for you to disappear too, Jessica. I swear to God, I didn't understand what he was asking of me until 2 nights ago, when Jin-ho stood in my hotel room and told me exactly what fixing the problem meant." Jessica went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I called you tonight to warn you, not to trap you." Nathaniel's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, his eyes darting once toward the paper screen door, as though he expected it to open any second. "I'm saying I told Jin-ho I'd bring you here, and instead I'm telling you to run. Right now. Out the back. There's a car. Jessica, I did terrible things to you. Unforgivable things. But I never wanted you dead. I need you to believe that even if you believe nothing else I've ever told you." For a moment, Jessica's carefully constructed composure wavered, not because she believed he deserved forgiveness, but because some small, exhausted part of her recognized this might be the first true thing he'd said to her in 3 years. And then the paper screen door slid open. Jin-ho stepped inside first, followed by 2 men Jessica didn't recognize, and behind them, unhurried, unmistakable, Yoon Tae-min himself. His expression carrying the particular calm of a man who had never once in his life expected to be disappointed, and had simply arrived to correct an error in real time. "Nathaniel," Tae-min said, almost gently, "I told you 2 days ago that discretion was the only thing I required of you. And yet, here we are." His gaze slid to Jessica. "And here you are, Mrs. Whitfield, looking remarkably composed for a woman who was just warned she's about to die." Jessica's heart slammed against her ribs, but she kept her voice level. "You've been listening. Jin-ho has been very good at his job for a very long time," Tae-min said. "Good enough to know when a man like your husband starts developing a conscience at precisely the worst possible moment." He turned to Nathaniel, and whatever warmth had briefly existed in his voice vanished entirely. You were told to bring her under control. Instead, you tried to send her running to Kang Do-hyun's men, who I imagine are sitting somewhere very close by right now, listening to every word of this conversation. The room went very cold. Jessica felt her pulse roaring in her ears, felt the tiny wire against her skin suddenly feel enormous, exposed, a countdown she could no longer control. "It's over, Taemin," she said, forcing steel into her voice, even as her hands trembled beneath the table. "Everything you and Nathaniel have done for the last 3 years, every forged signature, every laundered dollar, it's already documented. It's already with federal prosecutors on both sides of the Pacific. Killing me tonight doesn't erase any of it. It just adds murder to the list." Something flickered across Taemin's face, not fear, but the sharp recalculation of a man realizing the trap he'd walked into might not be the one he'd built. "You're bluffing." "Check the earring," Jessica said, and for the first time since walking into that room, she smiled, thin and cold. "It's been recording this entire conversation, including your very clear instruction to Nathaniel to bring me somewhere private so your men could, in your words, fix the problem I represent." Taemin's hand moved toward his jacket. Whether for a weapon or a phone, Jessica would never be certain, because in the same instant, the outer door of the restaurant burst open with a crash of splintering wood, and Do-hyun's men flooded the room from 2 directions at once, followed a heartbeat later by uniformed officers from the Seoul Metropolitan Police, moving with the speed and coordination of a raid that had been meticulously planned for exactly this moment. Do-hyun himself stepped through the wreckage of the door last, his eyes finding Jessica first, scanning her for injury with a desperation he didn't bother to hide, before turning cold and final on Taemin. "You should have taken my offer 4 months ago," Do-hyun said quietly, as officers moved to restrain Jin-ho and the 2 men flanking him. "When I offered to buy your shipping debt quietly and let you retire with what little dignity you had left. Instead, you built an empire on forged signatures and buried witnesses, and now you're going to spend the rest of your life explaining both to a judge." Taemin said nothing as they cuffed him, his composure cracking for the first time all evening into something that looked almost like disbelief. The particular disbelief of a powerful man discovering, too late, that power built on other people's silence collapses the moment someone finally decides to speak. Nathaniel sat frozen at the low table throughout all of it, and when officers finally approached him, he looked up at Jessica with an expression she would turn over in her mind for years afterward. Not defiance, not even fear, but something closer to relief. The exhausted relief of a man finally allowed to stop running from a lie he'd been carrying alone for 3 years. "I am sorry," he said quietly as they led him away. "For all of it. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry, Jessica." She watched him go and felt something complicated settle in her chest. Not forgiveness, not quite, but the beginning of something that might one day resemble peace. The trial took 11 months. Jessica flew back and forth between New York and Seoul more times than she could count, sitting through depositions, testifying in front of federal prosecutors, watching Grace Lynn dismantle 3 years of forged documents piece by careful piece, until the paper trail led exactly where it needed to, away from Jessica entirely, and directly into a conviction that would keep Taemin behind bars for the rest of his natural life. Nathaniel received a lighter sentence in exchange for testimony that helped convict 2 of Taemin's remaining lieutenants, a decision Jessica neither celebrated nor mourned, because by then she had stopped measuring her healing by what happened to him. The divorce was finalized on a gray Tuesday in March, quiet and unremarkable in exactly the way the wedding in Seoul had been anything but. Jessica signed the papers in a lawyer's office in Manhattan, alone, and felt something inside her loosen for the first time in 11 years. Not joy exactly, but the particular relief of setting down a weight she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying since long before she ever knew its true shape. Do-hyun flew to New York 3 weeks later, unannounced, standing outside her small gallery in Harlem, in a coat too heavy for the mild spring afternoon, looking, for the first time since she'd met him, genuinely uncertain of his welcome. "I didn't want to intrude," he said, when she opened the door and simply stared at him. "I know you've spent the last year rebuilding something you didn't ask me to complicate further. You flew 14 hours to tell me you didn't want to intrude," Jessica said, and something in her chest, some small stubborn hope she'd been guarding carefully since Seoul, finally let itself be felt. "I flew 14 hours, Do-hyun said, "because I spent 4 years grieving a woman I couldn't save, and then I met one who saved herself, and somewhere in the last 11 months, I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life 2 continents away from her, wondering." Jessica looked at him for a long moment. This man who had stood between her and a room full of danger on the worst night of her life, who had built a grief so specific it had reshaped his entire existence, who had never once asked her to be smaller, quieter, or more grateful than her circumstances suggested she should be. "Come in," she said. "The gallery's not much, but it's mine. Every wall of it, honestly mine." They married 18 months later, in a small ceremony in the gallery itself, surrounded by the work of unknown artists Jessica had spent a decade championing, and by the family Do-hyun had rebuilt around them both. Grace Lin standing as a witness, the quiet woman who'd brought Jessica tea that first impossible morning, seated proudly in the front row. 2 years after that, on a bright October morning in a hospital in Manhattan, Jessica gave birth to triplets, 2 girls and a boy, each of them arriving loud and furious and impossibly alive, and as Do-hyun held all 3 against his chest in the quiet hours before dawn, tears he didn't bother hiding running freely down his face, Jessica understood that the life she had built from the wreckage of that Seoul ballroom bore no resemblance to the one she'd walked into it believing she had. She had lost a husband who saw her as camouflage. She had gained one who saw her as the whole point. "There is a particular kind of strength," Jessica would tell her daughters years later, "that only reveals itself when everything you trusted turns out to be a lie. Not the strength of never being fooled, never being hurt, never being humiliated in front of a room full of strangers, but the strength of standing back up afterward and deciding, deliberately, who gets to help you rebuild." If this story kept you hooked, there's plenty more waiting for you in my ultimate Mafia Boss Love Collection. You'll get 15 complete stories, 20 audiobooks, and 5 exclusive bonus stories not available on YouTube. Click the link in the description, or simply scan the QR code by pausing the video and opening your phone's camera to get instant access in just a few moments. I can't wait for you to discover your next favorite love story. Before you go, I want to ask you one more time. Subscribe if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that survival is possible, even after the deepest betrayal. And tell me in the comments the biggest lesson you're walking away with tonight. Because sometimes the life that finds you after everything falls apart turns out to be more honest, more whole, and more truly yours than anything you lost. Welcome to your home of Afro-Korean stories, besties. We'll see you in the next one.